That oak is coming down today, whether you like it or not." The HOA president jabbed her finger in my chest, her face contorted with rage as she stood beside my fallen 200-year-old heritage oak. I crossed my arms defiantly, refusing to back down as chainsaw engines roared and sawdust filled the air. Her orange hard hat and safety vest couldn't disguise the smug satisfaction as she waved fraudulent documents from her clipboard. What this power-hungry bureaucrat never expected. Her illegal action would trigger a legal avalanche that exposed decades of corruption, bankrupted their entire HOA, and made her family name synonymous with fraud. Would you stand by while bureaucrats in suits destroyed your family's 200-year living legacy for their personal profit? The name's Robert Miller. For 30 years, I solved America's infrastructure problems as a civil engineer, building bridges, highways, and water systems that'll still be standing when my grandkids have grandkids. Men like me built this country to last. We respect tradition, property rights, and doing things by the book. At 55, a mild heart attack was God's way of telling me to return to what matters. I retired to my birthright, my grandfather's 5-acre farmhouse in Oakdale County. After earning a Purple Heart island hopping through Japanese-held territory in 1945, my grandfather built that house with his own calloused hands. 3 generations of Miller men had protected this land. Now was my watch. The crown jewel of our property was a majestic white oak that predated the Revolutionary War. Standing over 80 feet tall with a canopy spanning 120 feet, it dominated the landscape with a quiet dignity. My grandmother, who taught local history, had documented how Algonquin tribes once held councils beneath its branches. Archaeologists confirmed finding artifacts dating back 300 years around its base, and the County Historical Society placed a bronze marker designating it as a witness tree. This wasn't just any tree. It was our family's anchor through generations. I have photographs showing 5 generations of Millers gathered beneath its branches. My great-grandparents' anniversary in 1935, my parents' wedding in 1965, my daughter's christening in 1990. Every significant Miller family event happened under that oak's protective canopy. When I was 7, my grandfather spent a Saturday teaching me how to hang a tire swing from its strongest branch. "This tree will outlive us all, Robbie," he said, his voice respectful. It was here when Washington crossed the Delaware. It's witnessed the birth of our nation, the Civil War, 2 world wars. And God willing, it'll be standing proud long after you're old and gray. I believed him completely, until last spring, when I learned that even ancient giants can fall to human greed cloaked in a language of community improvement. The trouble began 11 months after I moved in. The adjacent Johnson farm was sold to Prestige Development Group for $4.2 million. Within weeks, the peaceful fields transformed into a construction zone. Within months, the foundations for Oak Ridge Estates emerged, 35 luxury homes starting at $750,000. I had no objections initially. The development was tastefully designed, and I welcomed my new neighbors warmly, offering homemade apple pies and historical information about the area. Several expressed genuine interest in local history, even asking to photograph the majestic oak. Everything seemed harmonious until January, when glossy brochures announced the formation of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, headed by interim president Richard Walsh, a retired accountant who seemed reasonable. Since my property predated the development by nearly 8 decades, I paid little attention, though I participated in community events. The trouble began in March when Vanessa Carter was elected HOA president. I first encountered her one afternoon as I was collecting my mail. She pulled her white Range Rover to a stop beside my mailbox. Designer sunglasses pushed atop her perfectly highlighted hair, an iPad clutched in her manicured hands. "Mr. Miller?" Vanessa Carter, new HOA president. Her smile never reached her eyes as she assessed my property with obvious distaste. "I wanted to discuss the challenges your property presents to our community standards." "Nice to meet you, though I'm not part of your HOA. My family's been here since 1945, well before your development existed." Her smile tightened. "Yes, well, that's precisely the issue. Your property is the first thing visitors see when approaching Oak Ridge Estates. The board has received numerous complaints about its rustic appearance. Rustic? I chuckled, gesturing toward my meticulously maintained farmhouse. My grandfather built this house to last centuries. The Historical Society featured it in their annual tour last fall. Historical doesn't need to mean unkempt, she replied sharply. That weathered barn, the split-rail fence, and especially that enormous tree dropping debris onto our roads. They're all affecting our property values and community aesthetic. Within days, certified letters started arriving in official-looking envelopes with the gold-embossed Oak Ridge Estates logo. Each cited increasingly obscure complaints. My mailbox didn't match community standards. My garden shed was non-conforming. The antique weather vane on my barn created visual clutter. Each letter referenced HOA bylaws that shouldn't have applied to my property at all. I attempted diplomacy, attending the next HOA meeting with county records showing my property's agricultural zoning and historical documentation of the oak tree's significance. I appreciate the chance to speak, I began. I understand your desire for a cohesive community appearance, but my property isn't within HOA jurisdiction. These documents confirm that, Mr. Miller, Vanessa interrupted, your technical zoning status is irrelevant. Your property directly affects our community's value and appearance. An older gentleman named Frank Peterson, a retired judge, raised his hand. Point of order, Vanessa. I've reviewed our bylaws, and they don't actually grant us authority over non-member properties. And that oak tree was there long before any of us. Vanessa's expression hardened. The board has received complaints from multiple homeowners about safety concerns. Without proper arborist certification, how can we be sure branches won't fall on residents' vehicles or injure someone? After the meeting, Frank approached me in the parking lot. Robert, watch yourself, he warned quietly. This isn't about aesthetics or safety. Vanessa's husband, James Carter, is CEO of Prestige Development Group. Before you moved back, they tried to buy your grandfather's land 3 times for Phase 2 of their development. He showed me a newspaper clipping with architectural renderings for Oak Ridge Estates Phase 2, featuring a luxury clubhouse positioned exactly where my house and oak tree stood. My grandfather never mentioned any offers, I said, stunned. He was protecting you. James Carter doesn't take rejection well. I've seen how they operate. They eliminate obstacles to their plans, one way or another. 2 days later, another certified letter arrived demanding I remove my hazardous oak tree within 30 days or face all available legal remedies. That night, I sat on my porch watching fireflies dance around the ancient oak. For the first time, I felt something beyond annoyance at the HOA's persistence. This wasn't just an overzealous homeowners association. It was a calculated corporate land grab disguised as community concern. I immediately contacted Thomas Green, the most respected arborist in the county. After a thorough examination of the tree, his verdict was clear. This oak is in perfect health, one of the finest specimens I've seen in 40 years of practice. Based on its ring patterns and diameter, it's approximately 210 to 225 years old. It was already growing when Thomas Jefferson was president. He provided a comprehensive report certifying the tree posed no safety hazard and documented its ecological significance as habitat for protected wildlife species. Next, I consulted Sarah Jenkins, a property rights attorney known for successfully challenging corporate overreach. After reviewing all documents, she was indignant. They're not just overstepping, they're operating in a legal fantasy. Your property is explicitly grandfathered under county zoning laws. The HOA has absolutely no authority over your land. She drafted a formal cease and desist letter citing relevant legal precedents and warning of consequences for harassment. I thought that would end it. I was wrong. Sunday afternoon, the low growl of a Cadillac Escalade broke the countryside silence. Through my sweat-streaked vision, I watched Vanessa emerge like a predator, flanked by 2 board members in tailored suits that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. We're here about the tree situation, she announced, her voice cutting through the air without so much as a greeting. I thrust Thomas's report and Sarah's letter into her manicured hands. This ends now. Your top arborist confirms the tree is perfectly healthy, and you have zero legal jurisdiction over my property. Her eyes never met the documents as she passed them dismissively to her associate. The board convened an emergency session last night, she declared, a thin smile playing at her lips. That tree has been classified as an immediate safety hazard. Rapid removal services arrives tomorrow morning at 7 sharp. I felt heat rising in my face as I crossed my arms defensively. Absolutely not. You have no legal right to touch anything on my property. Any attempt to do so will constitute criminal trespassing and destruction of protected property. The taller of the two men stepped forward, adjusting gold cufflinks. Mr. Miller, we're trying to be reasonable here. The HOA is prepared to cover half the removal costs as a gesture of goodwill. There will be no removal, I replied firmly. This conversation is over. Please leave my property immediately. Vanessa's professional mask slipped, revealing momentary anger as she jabbed her finger toward me. That tree is coming down one way or another, Mr. Miller. You can cooperate, or we can make things extremely difficult for you. Are you threatening me? I asked, maintaining my crossed-arm stance. She composed herself quickly, but her eyes remained cold. Not all. We're simply informing you of our commitment to community safety. We'll see ourselves out. After they left, I called Sarah again, who promised to file for an emergency protective order. Don't worry, she assured me. They can't legally touch your tree. That would be criminal trespassing and destruction of property. That evening, I noticed unfamiliar vehicles driving slowly past my house. I began photographing license plates and keeping detailed records of all unusual activity. The next day, I discovered something alarming. 6 weeks earlier, the HOA had filed a petition to rezone my entire area from agricultural historical to planned community development. If approved, it would potentially bring my land under their jurisdiction retroactively. Even more concerning, the petition had been filed 3 months before Vanessa first approached me about my rustic property. They'd been planning this systematic takeover from the beginning. Wednesday morning dawned with unusual clarity. As I left for my scheduled cardiology appointment in Philadelphia, I paused beside the oak, placing my hand against its bark. I'll be back soon, old friend, I murmured. An hour into my drive, my phone rang. It was Eleanor, my 80-year-old neighbor. Robert. Her voice was shrill with panic. They're cutting down your oak. That HOA woman is here with trucks and chainsaws. My blood turned to ice. What? I'm an hour away. Tell them they're trespassing. I tried. They showed me some official paper with a gold seal. They pushed me away when I protested. With shaking hands, I called the sheriff's department while racing to my car. The dispatcher promised to send someone, but warned it might take time. I called Sarah next. She was in court, but her assistant promised to reach her immediately. Then I called Thomas, who lived closer to my property. I'll head right over, he promised. 20 minutes later, Thomas called back. Robert, I'm so sorry. They've already started cutting. The main limbs are already down. The road before me blurred as tears filled my eyes. Stop them. Tell them I never authorized this. I tried everything. They showed me a court order signed by Judge Harmon authorizing emergency removal. I told them I certified the tree as healthy last week, but they dismissed it. At 11:37 a.m., I skidded to a halt beside my fallen heritage oak. Its massive trunk lay severed, the fresh-cut surface revealing 2 centuries of growth rings. Sawdust covered the ground like golden snow. I crossed my arms defensively, fighting to maintain composure in the face of this desecration. Vanessa stood opposite me, wearing a black suit, neon safety vest, and orange hard hat, clutching a clipboard. Her face contorted with self-righteous anger as she jabbed her finger toward me. This tree was coming down today, whether you liked it or not. She shouted, her voice shrill with authority. I have the legal documentation right here. What have you done? I demanded, my weathered face hardening. You have absolutely no jurisdiction over my property. She thrust the clipboard forward, displaying a document with an official gold seal. Emergency Hazard Removal Order, Mr. Miller. Signed by Judge Harmon himself. I snatched the paper from her hand. It looked legitimate, with the county court seal and what appeared to be Judge Harmon's signature. "This is impossible," I said. "We never had a hearing. My attorney would have been notified of any proceeding." "Emergency orders don't always require both parties to be present," she replied smoothly. "Your failure to address the hazard necessitated immediate action." Thomas examined the document and frowned deeply. "This order references an arborist report I supposedly submitted stating the tree has extensive internal decay threatening imminent collapse. I never wrote such a report. This is a complete fabrication." "There must be some misunderstanding," Vanessa said with feigned concern. "Our attorneys handled all the paperwork." A sheriff's deputy finally arrived. I explained the situation, showing him Sarah's letters establishing the HOA's lack of jurisdiction. The deputy asked the crew to pause work while he sorted things out. But it was too late. The damage was catastrophic. Even if they stopped now, the tree could never be saved. As I stood there watching the workers begin to pack up, I felt something break inside me. My grandfather's words echoed painfully. "This tree will outlive us all, Robbie." He was wrong. The tree hadn't outlived corporate greed and systematic corruption. Eleanor put her arm around my shoulders. "I took pictures and videos of everything," she whispered, "and I recorded Vanessa giving orders before they showed that court document." I nodded, unable to speak through my grief. But beneath that grief, something else was forming, a cold, resolute determination. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. For 7 days, I existed in darkness. The mutilated stump became my personal Gethsemane, a monument to failure I couldn't face. No food tasted right. Sleep eluded me. On the 8th morning, my door lock clicked. Eleanor's determined footsteps approached. Then light flooded my living room as she yanked open curtains. "Your grandfather didn't earn that Purple Heart in the Pacific just to have you surrender his land to vultures," she declared, dropping a thick manila folder onto my coffee table. 3 generations of Millers stood against harder challenges than this. She tapped the folder with a weathered finger. 6 decades in this county taught me to recognize patterns. Your tree isn't the first casualty of Carter's ambition, but it could be his last mistake." She methodically laid out evidence: newspaper clippings, property records, and handwritten notes documenting a systematic pattern of aggressive acquisitions by Carter Development Group. The Watson farm was condemned for a highway expansion that never happened. Riverside Nursing Home shut down for code violations that disappeared once the property was sold. 7 properties over 5 years, all acquired through questionable means, all developed by the same company. You think they want my land? 5 acres bordering their fancy development? Of course they do. That oak tree wasn't just your heritage. It was the first obstacle in their expansion plan. They'll find other ways to make your life unbearable until you give up and sell. That afternoon, I called Sarah Jenkins. She was outraged when I explained what had happened and immediately filed complaints alleging criminal trespass, destruction of protected property, and document fraud. "The court order is almost certainly fraudulent," she said. "Judge Harmon would never sign an emergency removal order without substantial evidence." Over the next few days, more neighbors reached out, not the HOA residents, but longtime county homeowners who had witnessed similar patterns of aggressive development. Frank Peterson, the retired judge, even resigned from the HOA board in protest and brought internal documents revealing the board's true intentions. I began meticulously organizing every document, email, and photograph related to the HOA's actions. Eleanor's recordings proved crucial. They clearly showed Vanessa directing the tree removal before any paperwork was presented. Sarah connected me with Michael Torres, an environmental attorney who specialized in heritage tree protection cases. "What they did isn't just trespassing," Michael explained. "That oak qualified for special protection under county regulations." A breakthrough came when Thomas discovered his electronic signature had been forged on a fabricated report claiming the tree had extensive internal decay, complete fiction used to justify the emergency removal order. Then, while cleaning my grandfather's old filing cabinet, I found something crucial: a conservation easement he'd established in 1978, specifically protecting the oak tree and surrounding acreage as natural habitat. The easement had been properly recorded with the county, but overlooked in recent years. "This changes everything," Sarah said when I showed her. "They didn't just cut down your tree. They violated a legally binding conservation agreement. The penalties are severe." As evidence mounted, I made a decision. "I want to go after them all," I told Sarah. The HOA, the board members personally, Vanessa, her husband's development company, everyone involved in this scheme. "This isn't just about your tree anymore," Sarah declared, pacing my living room, where she'd assembled an impromptu war council. "This is about corrupt power and systematic abuse." Within days, we built a formidable legal team. Sarah handled property rights issues, while Michael Torres, an environmental attorney specializing in heritage tree protection, documented the ecological impact. The most significant addition was Patricia Reyes, a former federal prosecutor who specialized in organized crime and fraud cases. "What we're seeing here," Patricia explained, spreading documents across my dining table, "is a coordinated conspiracy involving multiple parties acting in concert for financial gain. The HOA is being weaponized as a tool for corporate acquisition." We developed a three-pronged strategy. First, civil lawsuits against the HOA entity and individual board members for trespassing, destruction of property, and violation of the conservation easement. Second, environmental complaints with county and state agencies. Third, and most aggressively, RICO charges, racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations, connecting the tree destruction to the broader pattern of property acquisition tactics. "RICO?" I asked. "Isn't that for taking down mob bosses?" "It's for prosecuting organized groups, conducting patterns of illegal activity for profit," Patricia explained. "The penalties are severe: triple damages, asset seizure, and potential criminal charges." We assembled a bulletproof case. Thomas documented the forged credentials bearing his name. Judge Harmon's affidavit confirmed he never signed the fraudulent order. The smoking gun came from my grandfather's Land Matters folder containing 3 increasingly aggressive purchase offers from Carter Development Group, all predating Vanessa's HOA presidency. My grandfather had scrawled, "Not for sale at any price," across the final letter that contained veiled threats about changing zoning regulations. The 1978 conservation easement he established legally protected the oak. Vanessa's election as HOA president immediately after the rejected offers revealed their true motives. Our private investigator uncovered a conspiracy worthy of a John Grisham novel. The web of corruption left us stunned. 3 HOA board members secretly received consulting fees from Carter shell companies. The law firm behind the fraudulent court order had represented Carter in 18 transactions, and a senior partner's daughter was engaged to Carter's son. Most shocking, the independent tree removal company was registered to James Carter's brother-in-law, operating from a shell address that traced back to Carter Development headquarters. The smoking gun came when we discovered Vanessa had secretly recorded HOA meetings without members' knowledge. On one recording, she explicitly stated, "Once Miller's land is ours, James will triple everyone's property values with a new country club." She had promised board members exclusive memberships in exchange for their complicity. "They were methodical," Sarah observed, "but their very thoroughness provides us with a documented trail of premeditation." The investigation also revealed their weakness: arrogance. They'd been so confident in their strategy, so accustomed to intimidating homeowners into compliance, that they'd become sloppy. Email communications contained explicit references to their true motives. Vanessa had written to her husband, "Once the tree is gone, he'll have no reason to stay. The land will be ours by Christmas." By the time we finished our preparation, we had built an airtight case documenting not just the destruction of my oak, but the entire corrupt ecosystem that had enabled it. A breakthrough came when Eleanor introduced me to Martha Sullivan, an 82-year-old widow who had sold her home after relentless HOA harassment. "They cited me for peeling paint 15 times in 2 months," she revealed. "They fined me thousands until I couldn't take it anymore." Records showed Martha's home was purchased by a shell company owned by James Carter for 30% below market value, then flipped 3 months later at a $175,000 profit. We found 7 similar cases within 2 years. I refinanced my house to fund the legal battle. This isn't about money, I told my team. It's about justice for everyone they've harmed and making sure they never do this again. 6 weeks after the tree cutting, we were ready to launch our counteroffensive. The element of surprise is our greatest advantage, Patricia advised. We strike everywhere simultaneously. Monday morning arrived with perfect tactical weather, clear skies for the media coverage we intended to generate. At 8:45 a.m., I stood on my porch beside the massive stump. My cell phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. All teams in position. It's time. At precisely 9 a.m., our legal juggernaut launched. 17 separate actions filed simultaneously across multiple jurisdictions. The timing was deliberately synchronized to prevent any warning calls between the defendants. By 9:30, process servers were delivering papers to each target. Vanessa was served during her weekly yoga class. Her husband received his legal documents during a presentation to investors. Each board member was located and served within the same 15-minute window. At 10 a.m., environmental protection officers with search warrants entered the HOA offices, confiscating computers, files, and records. Simultaneously, county fraud investigators arrived at Carter Development Group headquarters with their own warrants. The media coverage exceeded our expectations. By noon, local TV stations had interrupted regular programming. Historic oak tree destruction leads to multi-million-dollar RICO lawsuit against prestigious HOA. At 2 p.m., we held our press conference beside the massive stump. The visual was deliberately stark, my hand resting on the exposed rings of the tree that had witnessed centuries of American history, while our legal team lined up beside me. Today we're taking action against more than the destruction of a tree, I told the assembled reporters. We're confronting an organized system of corruption and intimidation that has victimized homeowners throughout this county. Sarah outlined our legal claims methodically. Michael explained the environmental impact. Then Patricia delivered the bombshell evidence of the broader conspiracy, including emails between Vanessa and her husband explicitly discussing how to force me off my property. This case represents a pattern of racketeering activity that meets the legal definition under federal RICO statutes, she explained. We distributed press packets containing the forged court order, emails between conspirators, and a timeline revealing their calculated pattern of harassment culminating in the tree's destruction. Eleanor gave a powerful eyewitness account of the tree cutting. I watched them destroy 200 years of history in less than 2 hours, she told reporters. They knew exactly what they were doing. The response was overwhelming. By evening, all 3 local TV stations led their broadcasts with our story. Social media erupted with calls for justice. The county commissioner's office issued a statement promising a thorough investigation. Judge Harmon gave an impromptu press conference denouncing the fraud committed in his name. Most satisfying was watching the HOA leadership scramble to respond. They hastily convened their own press event the following morning, a defensive affair where Vanessa attempted to portray herself as a dedicated volunteer being persecuted for following proper procedures. Her performance collapsed when a reporter asked about her husband's ownership of the tree removal company. Vanessa denied any connection, unaware that our press packet had already provided documentation proving otherwise. The moment of her obvious lie was captured on camera, becoming the lead story on evening news broadcasts. The response was overwhelming. By evening, all 3 local TV stations had broadcast the story. Social media erupted with outrage. The county commissioner's office issued a statement promising a full investigation. The judge whose signature had been forged called for a criminal probe. The following day, Vanessa held a hastily organized counter-press conference, portraying herself as a dedicated community volunteer being persecuted for following proper procedures. The tree was a hazard that threatened public safety, she insisted. The HOA acted according to legal advice and court authorization. Her performance might have been convincing if not for what happened next. A reporter asked about her husband's ownership of the tree removal company. Vanessa denied any connection, unaware that we had already provided documentation proving otherwise. The moment of her obvious lie was captured on camera, becoming the lead story on evening news. By week's end, cracks in the HOA's unity were showing. 2 board members resigned, citing personal reasons. Several homeowners contacted our legal team, offering testimony about HOA intimidation tactics they had experienced. The first court hearing was scheduled before Judge Melissa Ortega, known for her no-nonsense approach to property disputes. The HOA's attorneys attempted to have our cases dismissed on procedural grounds. Judge Ortega removed her glasses, fixing the HOA's attorney with a penetrating stare. The plaintiff's property isn't even within HOA jurisdiction, correct? Well, Your Honor, there are easements that answer the question, counselor. Yes or no? Technically, no, but and this conservation easement explicitly prohibited removal of the tree regardless of any safety concerns, did it not? Judge Ortega held up the purported emergency order. This document bears Judge Harmon's signature, yet he has submitted a sworn affidavit stating he never signed it. I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office today. 3 days later, the HOA's insurance company declined to defend the case, citing exclusions for intentional wrongdoing and fraud. This meant the HOA and individual board members would bear legal costs themselves, a devastating financial blow. As summer progressed toward fall, the HOA's carefully constructed facade crumbled with astonishing speed. Our coordinated legal assault had caught them completely unprepared for the scale and scope of our response. The first major blow came when Judge Melissa Ortega denied their motion to dismiss. When their attorney attempted to argue the HOA had jurisdiction to protect community safety, she fixed him with a penetrating stare. "Counselor, does your client understand the concept of property boundaries?" she asked. "The plaintiff's land isn't within HOA territory. By what authority did they enter his property and destroy a protected tree?" "Well, Your Honor, there are easements that a simple yes or no, counselor." "Technically, no, but in the conservation easement, registered with the National Registry of Historic Places, explicitly protected this tree as living heritage, did it not?" Judge Ortega held up the forged order. Most disturbing is this fraudulent document bearing Judge Harmon's purported signature. I am referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. 3 days later came another devastating blow. The HOA's insurance company refused coverage, citing exclusions for intentional wrongdoing, fraud, and criminal acts. This left board members personally exposed to all legal consequences. The fallout was swift. The county prosecutor initiated criminal proceedings for document forgery. The state attorney general launched an investigation into misuse of HOA funds. The Heritage Tree Commission imposed unprecedented $400,000 penalties for destroying a living historical monument that had witnessed the founding of America. Residents who once boasted about their prestigious addresses now faced a community disgraced by headlines like HOA destroys Revolutionary War-era monument for profit. 3 more board members resigned with public statements disavowing decisions made without full board knowledge or approval. At one volatile HOA meeting, homeowner Maria Delgado, a retired elementary school principal, confronted the remaining board members. "I joined this community for peace and security in my retirement," she declared. "I've paid over $30,000 in HOA dues over the years. And this is how you've spent it? On fraudulent legal actions and personal vendettas." She held up her dues statement. "I refuse to pay another cent until every one of you resigns and a full accounting of HOA funds is made public." The room erupted in applause. By the meeting's end, 43 homeowners had joined her pledge to withhold dues payments until the board was completely replaced. Desperate to contain the catastrophe, the remaining board members hired a crisis management firm. Their representative immediately sought settlement discussions. "My clients wish to resolve this matter expeditiously," he offered, sliding a document across the table. $50,000 for the tree, paid immediately, contingent only on your dropping all claims against individual board members. Sarah didn't even touch the document. "Is this a joke?" she asked coldly. "Your clients destroyed a 2-century-old protected tree through documented fraud. $50,000 wouldn't cover a week of our legal costs." Meanwhile, our forensic accountant uncovered damning evidence. Bank records revealed the HOA had paid over $780,000 in consulting fees to Carter Development subsidiaries, nearly 40% of all homeowner dues collected. Minutes from closed executive sessions documented explicit discussions about strategic acquisition of my property for a planned expansion. Most damning was an email from Vanessa to her husband. "The tree is his emotional anchor. Once it's gone, his resistance will crumble." These revelations turned more homeowners against the board. A petition for a special election gathered signatures from over 70% of residents. Sensing defeat, Vanessa resigned as president, citing health concerns and the toxic atmosphere created by baseless accusations. In November, 4 months after filing our lawsuits, I testified at our motion for summary judgment hearing. I brought my grandmother's photo album showing generations of Millers gathered around the oak. "This wasn't just a tree," I told the court. "It was a living connection to my ancestors, to history itself. It survived the Civil War, 2 World Wars, the Great Depression, only to be cut down in less than 2 hours by people who saw it as nothing but an obstacle to profit." Judge Ortega's decision was unequivocal. The court finds the defendant's actions constituted willful trespassing and destruction of protected property. The violation of the conservation easement was particularly egregious. I am granting the plaintiff's motion for summary judgment on all counts. January brought resolution on multiple fronts. The settlement became official, with the HOA making an initial payment and agreeing to structured payments over 5 years. To meet these obligations, they imposed a special assessment on all homeowners, sparking renewed anger toward Vanessa and her co-conspirators. The criminal investigations progressed rapidly. Vanessa and 2 others were indicted for document forgery, fraud, and conspiracy. James Carter faced separate charges related to wire fraud and racketeering. The tree removal company was fined and lost its operating license. Most significant was Judge Ortega's landmark ruling on the environmental claims. This case represents not merely the destruction of one tree, but an assault on our collective natural heritage, she declared. She ordered the creation of the Miller Heritage Conservation Corridor, a protected zone encompassing not just my property, but connecting several natural areas throughout the county. Her opinion established binding legal precedent for protecting heritage trees statewide. The financial impact on the HOA was cataclysmic. Property values plummeted 30% overnight. They were forced to dramatically restructure, with new bylaws that stripped away their previous authority and mandated transparency. Annual dues increased by 60% to cover settlement payments, triggering a mass exodus of homeowners. For Vanessa and James Carter, the consequences were personal and professional. Their development company lost contracts and faced its own lawsuits. Their reputation was shattered. They eventually sold their Oak Ridge Estates home at a significant loss and moved out of state ahead of their criminal trials. With the legal battles behind me, I focused on healing both the land and community. I used a portion of the settlement to establish the Miller Heritage Conservation Project, dedicated to protecting historic trees throughout the county. Though nothing could replace the ancient oak, we planted young saplings from acorns gathered from the original tree years earlier. Thomas had preserved them as part of a local heritage tree program. The most meaningful moment came in April, on what would have been my grandfather's 110th birthday. I invited neighbors to a planting ceremony for a special sapling grown from my oak's direct lineage. Howard Grayson, the new HOA president, spoke about learning from past mistakes. Eleanor shared memories of the original tree. Even Frank helped shovel soil around the young tree's roots. "This won't grow to be 200 years old in my lifetime," I told the gathered neighbors. But maybe my grandchildren will sit beneath its branches someday and remember this story. 2 years later, I stand beside the young oak sapling that now grows where its ancestor once stood. Though barely 10 feet tall, it's sturdy and vibrant, a living symbol of resilience. The landscape has transformed. Where my grandfather's majestic oak once towered, there's now the Miller Heritage Garden, a community space where neighbors gather to plant, harvest, and remember. The HOA exists in name only, restructured beyond recognition. After narrowly avoiding complete dissolution, they operate under court-mandated oversight with transparent governance and strictly limited powers. Their quarterly newsletter now features a permanent reminder of the case that transformed them, the Miller Standard, our commitment to honorable community governance. As for Vanessa and James Carter, they live in a modest apartment 3 states away. Their development empire collapsed amid criminal convictions and civil judgments. A Wall Street Journal expose titled "The HOA Conquest Scheme" detailed their methods, leading to investigations nationwide. The Miller Rule has become shorthand nationally for heritage tree protection, adopted by 17 counties and 4 state legislatures. Our case is now taught in environmental law classes at 3 universities. My personal battle birthed a national movement against HOA overreach. Our legal team now leads a nonprofit protecting property rights across America. Last weekend, my 7-year-old granddaughter Emma helped me tie a rope swing to the young oak sapling. "When will it be as big as your special tree?" she asked, swinging gently. "Not in my lifetime, but maybe in yours." Her eyes narrowed with determination. "Then I'll protect it," she promised, "like you did." The ancient oak is gone, but in its place grows something more powerful, a legacy of resistance. As my grandfather said after returning from war, sometimes, Robbie, a storm that brings down one mighty tree seeds a whole forest in its place.